welcome to the USC School of Architecture lecture series. I'm Milton Curry. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture here at USC. Our school's legacy really is defined by the value of our faculty and our graduates to contribute to the future of the profession and to our world, synthesizing learnings from research, the classroom, and the field to create a holistic and informed view of our discipline. We believe that great architecture, landscapes, and cities find their most powerful expression through their impact on the persons who inhabit them and experience them now and into the future. Tonight, we welcome Kunlé Adeyemi, an architect who lives and works by this very ethos. Kunlé is an architect, designer, and urban researcher. He's the founder and principal of Kunlé, an architecture, design, and urbanism firm founded by him and focusing on developing cities and communities. Before founding this firm, he worked for OMA and RIM Koolhaas, where he led the design, development, and execution of high-level projects such as the Shenzhen Stock Exchange Tower in China, the Qatar Foundation headquarters, Qatar National Library, and Prada Transformer in Seoul. He's been a visiting critic at Cornell, Columbia, Princeton, the GSD at Harvard, MIT, Cooper Union, and the School of Oriental and African Studies, the AA in London, the ETH in Zurich, and Delft Technical University in the Netherlands. His main area of academic interest is in developing cities of the Global South, and he's pursued and developed this issue with a number of research papers and study opportunities. They include a post-professional degree from Princeton, where he worked with Peter Eisenman and investigated rapid urbanization and the role of market economies in developing cities of the Global South, focusing on Lagos. His hypothesis, Urban Crawl, published in Log Journal, is a critical expose on architecture and urbanism in emerging megacities of the Global South, which also unravels the complex urban conditions and operative mechanisms of such cities. His notable works include the Makoko Floating School, an innovative prototype floating structure located in the lagoon, the original version, located on the lagoon heart of Lagos, Nigeria. This acclaimed project is part of an extensive research project, African Water Cities, that he's undertaken with his firm. He's recently launched MFS2, a new improved iteration of the Makoko Floating School at the 15th International Architecture Exhibition, the biennial in Venice, where he won the Silver Lion Prize just 2 years ago. Other projects include the Chikoko Radio Media Center, an ambitious community building in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, ROC, Lakefront Kiosk in Chicago, CDL head offices in Lagos, Nigeria, and Serpentine Summer House at Royal Kensington Gardens in London. I first became aware of Kunlé's work when he invited me to be a juror for his studio at Cornell University in 2014, 2015. And I was taken by the joinery in his work and in his teaching, joining old school making of architecture, construction technology, and high technology, digital fabrication, and putting a nail in wood. And I think that ethos is very important to the way that he's pursued his practice and the way that he's pursued his teaching, and he's really contributed a lot to the discourse of architecture already in such a young career. The system he developed for the floating school has now become the floating system and is being prototyped for different locations. And I want to announce tonight, I don't see Sophia Borges, but with Mad Workshop, who we've partnered with at the school before on projects like Homeless House for the Homeless and other projects, the MOCAD Plaza work that was done with students in Mad Workshop several years ago. In partnering with Mad Workshop, we're going to be bringing the floating system to LA, which is going to be fantastic. And I want to invite any students who might be interested in working on this in the next year to come after the lecture and just write your email, and we'll get in touch with you as we develop kind of a student working group to think about how to program the structure, not only with architects, but with maybe some interdisciplinary art students across campus in different disciplines. So that's very exciting, and will keep Kunlé connected to the school and to LA in the coming year. With that, I'm really excited today to welcome Kunlé. He's going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then there'll be 20 minutes of Q&A, 20 to 25 minutes. I promised, I'm going to keep my promise that I made to freshmen, that if there are freshmen here, the first question, I will call on someone. That person will be a freshman. And then I'll go to a student from there, and then faculty from there. So students, I really want you to be engaged. I've heard from you over the years that I've been here that you want more conversations at the lectures, so I really want you to think about asking a question and being the first to do so. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kunlé Adeyemi to USC Architecture.
Thank you so much, Milton. It's a great honor to be here, to be back in LA again. I was fortunate to be here a few months ago at Otis College. Was anyone at the lecture the last time? Okay, good. So, just Stephen. I did tell him that he can get a pass for not being here, and to hear me repeat myself. There's not much work that has been done in the last 4 months, but thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and it's very exciting to be in LA. It's one of the cities that I really love, and also very fascinated by its sheer size and great weather. Coming from Lagos, I always tell people that I bring the sun, but I can't make that claim here in LA. So thank you for having me. My practice, as Milton generously introduced, is called Kunlé. And Kunlé means at home in Yoruba. Yoruba is one of Africa's most populous languages or groups. And in fact, it's one of the first truly urbanized communities or groups on the continent. And I believe the home is the building block of every society, and that's basically the fundamental aspect of my practice. At Kunlé, we really stand for diversity and coexistence between humanity and the environment. And I say that because we deal, in fact, our clients are people, but also the environment. So we sort of look at both people and the environment with equity, let's say. And I would say, I'm an environmentalist in that sense, but not necessarily one that is bent on the idea of saving the planet. And I say that because I recently came across an interesting what's his name? His name is George Carlin. He's a comedian, a social, political comedian. I don't know if you've seen some of the skits that he's made, but I pulled out something for you to enjoy, because I really think our work in trying to bring together issues of humanity and the environment should be seen from a point where we really understand that the environment is also incredibly powerful. So this is a little skit from George Carlin about saving the planet. You have to excuse some of the language there, but it's quite funny.
We're walking around all day long, every minute of the day, worried about everything. Worried about the air, worried about the water, worried about the soil. Worried about insecticides, pesticides, food additives, carcinogens. Worried about radon gas, worried about asbestos. worried about saving endangered species. Let me tell you about endangered species, all right? Saving endangered species is just one more arrogant attempt by humans to control nature. It's arrogant meddling. It's what got us in trouble in the first place. Doesn't anybody understand that? Interfering with nature. Over 90%, way over 90% of all the species that have ever lived on this planet, are gone. They're extinct. We didn't kill them all. They just disappeared. That's what nature does. They disappear these days at the rate of 25 a day. And I mean regardless of our behavior. Irrespective of how we act on this planet, 25 species that were here today will be gone tomorrow. Let them go gracefully. Leave nature alone. Haven't we done enough? We're so self-important. So self-important. Everybody's going to save something now. Save the trees, save the bees, save the whales, save those snails. And the greatest arrogance of all, save the planet. What? Are these fucking people kidding me? Save the planet? We don't even know how to take care of ourselves yet. We haven't learned how to care for one another. We're gonna save the fucking planet? I'm getting tired of that shit.
Anyway, George Carlin is a comedian. He's very cynical, but I thought this is really funny as an introduction to our position in how we deal with the issues of the environment, and that the environment itself is such a powerful force of nature, and it's not so much about how we deal with how we tackle. We don't see it from a point of weakness, but we actually see that we need to build better relationships between the humanity and the environment. So it's not, and when you recognize the force and the strength of nature in itself, then the solution is not necessarily working to save the planets as per se, but is really about how to coexist with the environment and how it's going. And we do that through research, innovation, and design. And like Milton said, I've had the opportunity over the last 20 years to work in different regions on different projects from my background at OMA to my practice, which is currently 8 years old. And some of the things that we've done includes the Black Rhino Academy, which is a school built in a very remote area in Tanzania. And we built it with very limited resources, but kind of also looking at how we can create an environment that essentially coexists with nature, where people are already kind of living in nature, and learning from people who have built a lot. You see that's the beautiful family there with their homes way out in the background there. Tanzania, how many people have been? Okay. Southeast. It's actually, it's not quite southeast, but it's a beautiful environment where you have nature and kind of animals running around, and where you actually have real zebra crossings. And we kind of managed to build this structure there with with local materials, local resources. The terrain is really undulating, and we had to create this element that sort of bridged the topography with very simple curves. And one of the questions at the time was how to build the curves. And we, decided to just hang loose chains to create catenaries, and they just sort of built around it. So, there's very little kind of technology or complex information that you had to exchange with people, so, a catenary in the kind of original position just worked as fine. So this kind of a view through the building with all the bricks were made locally It's a kind of an amazing site where the idea was for the students to learn not only formal education, but also be inspired and learn from the environment. All the furniture and items that you see there were designed and built right there on site. The windows also created with these arches. So it's quite a simple structure, a simple building that was completed in 2018, and we're going into different phases for other aspects of it. Then another quick project before I sort of get into the main body of work that I would like to share today is A Prelude to the Shed. It's a project that we were commissioned to do last year by The Shed. The Shed is a new cultural institution in New York, which many of you must have seen. And we were asked to create a kind of a first instantiation of The Shed to demonstrate its culture. And it was kind of a moment to bring together. I worked with Tino Segal, who is an artist, and we kind of collaborated to create this fusion between architecture and choreography. Some of the programs that took place in the project included music, some dance from William Forsythe and Red Rock. And for me, the idea was the shed that was being built is this structure, this sort of huge machine, that the idea for it is to kind of move and change space and occupy public space and contract. But I wanted our version of it, the prelude of it, to be more human, at a more human scale. And as a kind of a commentary on the idea of a shed, what we did was we really just took an industrial shed and deconstructed it conceptually, and created walls that were made of chairs. And what happens is that, like the shed, the walls can move and you can recreate the space and reconfigure it to have different formats and different uses. So the roof is this sort of floating element made from corrugated steel, and the walls are actually made of chairs, which was quite a funny thing that happened. The process was that we were trying to build walls that moved, and in New York, that's like, a lawsuit waiting to happen. But then I asked, when can you move furniture on public spaces? Like, yeah, okay, and you can't move a wall? No. Well, you can, but you have to put it on wheels. You have to put it on. I mean, the engineering is just incredible. So I said, when does a chair become a wall? And nobody could answer. So we made chairs that were walls, and you could then sit on it, pull it apart, and then they were also on wheels. So what would happen is that after every event, you could create this completely you can transform the building from a complete public space to a black box, where the work of Tino Segal, which is called This Variation, took place. The key thing for me at this is the idea of engaging architecture that is somewhat analog, and that you, with very simple means, you can still create something that has a lot of transformative capacity, and that it's at human scale. You don't need to have super heavy equipment to mobilize the space. So, which sort of brings me to the sort of a series of the body of work that I'm presenting today. Landing in LA is always very exciting. This is one of the things I really enjoy doing, flying, just landing and looking at cities. Cities, you can almost read them like a script, but LA is quite a, it's quite a thesis. In one incredible sprawl of city going on and on and on and on. Also a very important demonstration of the capacity of human to cultivate its environment in what we now know as urbanization. Of course, one of the most important archetypes of urbanization, we landed safely, by the way, is New York, Manhattan, with the sort of epitome of the growth of cities and height and complexity, and it really shows the capacity of humans to kind of conquer the environment or to occupy and possess but at the same time, this incredible image taken by Iwan Ban, a good friend of ours, I'm sure a lot of us here. He also captured this same view of Manhattan in 2012, where when after Superstorm Sandy, where almost half of it shut down after a storm, where it starts to bring attention to cities of very importance like Manhattan, that the issue of climate change is real, even though we know it's still highly debated by some people in power. But the fact is that nearly 80% of all cities around the world are by water, somewhat next to water, or have large water bodies. And I mean, when you think about that, it's staggering. But then again, it's not, right? Cities have always been settled around water. The first settlements known to mankind, the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia, is settled around rivers, and that's obvious because you need water for agriculture, for sustaining life, for transportation. So cities have always settled around water, and with the impact of climate change, we're starting to see changes happening in those regions. But not only are we dealing with the impact of climate change, we're also dealing with challenges of pollution, conditions. For instance, this is a cover of the National Geographic, I think a few months ago, probably last year. It's a very iconic cover which says "Plastic or Planet or Plastic." And these are some of the most important challenges that we're facing right now. And finding solutions to either tackle this is definitely a big part of our agenda. Even though I'm going to bring our good friend George Carlin, who has his position again on plastics.
Has been through a lot worse than us. Been through all kinds of things worse than us. Been through earthquakes, volcanoes, plate tectonics, continental drift, solar flares, sunspots, magnetic storms, the magnetic reversal of the poles, hundreds of thousands of years of bombardment by comets and asteroids and meteors, worldwide floods, tidal waves, worldwide fires, erosion, cosmic rays, recurring ice ages, and we think some plastic bags and some aluminum cans are going to make a difference? The planet isn't going anywhere. We are. We're going away. Pack your shit, folks.
Yeah. So anyway, it's I think it's funny, but also it's cynical, and there's a sense of, for me, there's a sense of reality in his comedy, in the sense that, in the fact that the planet is, we are dealing with challenges on Earth, and we're dealing with real issues, but the position that we sometimes take is one where we think we're actually able to conquer it, we're able to sort of fight it, or we're able to sort of deal with it, but actually the forces of nature are so strong that we may have to learn to deal with it in a totally different way. Instead of trying to fight every time or thinking we're in a position of power, we should perhaps consider how to learn to live with it and deal with it better. And this is very evident in these kinds of conditions that we see all over the world these days with hurricanes and floods, and we're dealing with one currently with Hurricane Dorian. And we have these kinds of images being put out with cities that's at risk, Miami flooding. In one instance, you're thinking this is, it seems like a very disturbing situation. But then again, I'm quite inspired by a view like this, wondering what cities would be like in the future when we start to have not only skyscrapers but maybe water scrapers, and learning to actually see this as a new form of urbanism. Now, that then sort of took me further into looking at a specific region that, of course, I'm from Africa, but also one that is particularly challenged by the impact of climate change, where nearly 70% of all African cities and capitals are also next to water. So, I think for most people, how many people here have been to any African city? Okay. All right. So it's fair proportion. I think we can do better. And I always kind of say, African cities aren't really all jungles and safaris like in my first project. I hate to disappoint you. There are actually lots of big cities, Cape Town, Dakar, Dar es Salaam, Lagos, and most of these cities are not only growing rapidly, Africa being the second most urbanizing continent in the world, with a population that has the highest population of young people, I think with probably, I don't know what the statistics are, but most of it, probably about over 70% is they're under 25 or something of that nature. But it's also one that is that a large area of it is affected by climate change and is impacted by, even though it is said to be the least responsible for climate change. Now, when we talk about climate change, a lot of people, it's all about CO2 emissions, carbon reduction, sea level rise, of course, comes into play. But the most palpable impact of climate change in the region is flooding. You get conditions like this where people are struggling to get around. But what's ironic is that on one side, you kind of see people trying to sort of get out of the car, get out of this of the flood, but on the other hand, some people still trying to conquer it. But we do have evidence of people really already having fun, and for me, these guys actually exemplify really what our practice is about, where in the face of challenges, you actually take this as an opportunity and you go for a ride. And you begin to sort of innovate, adapt, and this is sort of a sense of resilience that we find a lot in many African cities, where people in the background, they are still dealing with high technology, but these guys they're making do with probably scrap materials that they have already. In 2011, that image that you saw, I actually witnessed. I was in Lagos at the time, and I was so shocked by the situation, but also inspired. And I realized that not only are we dealing with the issues of urbanization on the African continent, but we're actually also dealing with the impact of climate change. And I launched a project called the African Water Cities Project, which looks at the intersection of these two things, and climate change and urbanization, and starting to explore how people are dealing with these conditions in different cities. So this is a ranking of top 20 African cities that we call water cities. And we began researching the cities with different institutions from Cornell in 2014 and 15 to then Columbia, Harvard, and this year Princeton. We're collecting some research material, publishing a book sometime next year, and this is sort of a body of work on the research phase. Also, again, George Carlin.
The planet will be here for a long
his kind of last words
after we're gone, and it will heal itself, it will cleanse itself, because that's what it does. It's a self-correcting system. The air and the water will recover, the earth will be renewed, and if it's true that plastic is not degradable, well, the planet will simply incorporate plastic into a new paradigm, the earth plus plastic. The earth doesn't share our prejudice towards plastic. Plastic came out of the earth. The earth probably sees plastic as just another one of its children. Could be the only reason the earth allowed us to be spawned from it in the first place. It wanted plastic for itself.
Yeah, anyway, so that's George Carlin again. But I think what's also interesting for me is that, he has a capacity to get you to actually think differently, maybe actually this world isn't what we think of it, and how do we start to look at integrating the challenge that we have as part of our day-to-day life, but allows us to think differently, build differently, and hopefully learn to live differently, which then takes us into the current status of the issues of flooding, the issues of cities development, and recently even the UN is now thinking differently. The UN announced that floating cities could actually ease the world's housing crunch, and they are now looking at that, okay, well, maybe what if we start to build on water? What if we start building floating cities? Particularly in an era where land is overrated, where constantly trying to build on land and having large reclamation projects everywhere. So we started looking at floating cities and communities all over the world, the vernacular architecture that you find in different regions, from Peru to Vietnam, Thailand, China, contemporary architecture in Seattle, San Francisco, Amsterdam is one big place that has always had a culture of water. And also ideas out there. And some of you probably have explored some of those ideas of floating cities and different kinds of floating structures from, art projects all over the world, still typologies, vernacular architecture, contemporary ideas, even underwater world. So there's a whole large kind of inventory of how we could coexist or live or begin to kind of adapt or create environments from, poor neighborhoods to rich places, rich and luxury environments all over the world. We also looked at what people are doing in terms of production, rapid production, prefab structures, and looked at the kind of inventory that is of typologies that are existing, but none of them actually are really designed for, let's say, everyday people. Most of them are complex. Most of them are not really, they're not really built for people that are mostly in these regions that you have water settlements. In the global south, mostly in Africa and Southeast Asia. These are some of the structures that you see in Africa, from Gambia to Nzulezo in Ghana, where, in my view, these are sort of, they are insights to, let's say, kind of early civilizations of cities, how they settle, and almost like the DNA of what we imagine as future cities today. So in a way, I'm always inspired by what's happening already, local knowledge, let's say what you might call local intelligence or collective intelligence. I believe there's always a solution where the problem itself exists. And one of the main challenges that in many African cities and Asian cities, and in fact in many cities of the world, we're still underprepared for the impact of climate change. And, from issues of poor housing quality to sanitation to education, infrastructure, the problem is, it's huge. Which in 2011, after that flood in Lagos, while I was researching affordable housing for Lagos at the time, I was actually inspired by a community called Makoko, and led me to the project that I will be showing you today, which is the Makoko floating system, which started out as a school, but became really just a simple way to build on water by hand. And this is Makoko. Makoko is essentially a floating village built primarily on stilts, and it has, some areas on land, but most of it is on water, with houses, about 2,000 units of houses, and it's said to have a population of nearly 80,000 to 100,000 people, with very little infrastructure, there are no roads, conventional roads, very poor sanitation condition. And this is, let's say, kind of a typical home in Makoko. When you look at this, you're first of all struck by the condition of this gentleman who lives in this place that looks like a slum. You technically define this as a slum, right? But I'm always inspired by the fact that this man still has pretty much everything he needs in a kind of strange way. That's him with 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, 6 kids, more than most of us will ever have. And he's got his bathroom, he's got a kitchen. This is where he cooks. This is what he drives. This is his main living room. This is, his front porch. You may not be excited about being there, but there's a lot to learn from how this person has been able to create so much out of so little, and how a population of nearly 80,000 people have been able to create a city, so to speak. So for me, it was both a place that was challenging, but also a place that I could learn from. And we started then with a simple idea that how do we tackle the challenges of flooding? Because not only, they are on stilts, which meant that sometimes they do get flooded. And what the first solution was, how do we deal with that by kind of creating a system to adapt to the flooding. Makoko is in Lagos, and Lagos is a port city, and they have somehow kind of access to a lot of these barrels, and sometimes some leftovers of these elements that is used for pipelines, floating pipelines across water. And I was actually inspired when we're trying to find a way to float the platform. I was inspired by these kids that were just kind of already doing it, So, every time we sort of we find a problem right there in the same condition was the solution. And we used local materials and bamboo and created this floating platform where the kids jumped on it right away, and it felt like they were home. And we built the first structure. We worked together with the community created this thing, but I also had access to people, experts in the Netherlands, who taught me basic principles of flotation and balance, and and things like and structure. And so we built the first one, which was somewhat just a minimum viable product, what you would call in product design, because you just you build something, you try it out first, and in a way, the first was not perfect, but somehow it began to make everything around it perfect. The main aspect of this structure is really just the frame, the structural frame, which is made from wood, some steel elements, and a flotation device. And it was a process of learning from a community and the people who built. These are some of the first moments of kind of working kids having a great time. Us kind of putting to the flotation device, the community putting anchors, building, having fun. So this kind of first structure it was built in about a month and a half. The main structural frame was built fairly quickly, and it was used extensively. It was supported by so I started it out, as research on affordable housing, but when the idea evolved into this floating building, and which was inspired by the challenges of climate change, we actually got funding from the UNDP and the Federal Ministry of Environment under the Africa Adaptation Program. So it wasn't really a project for housing, or it was really about. It was from the onset a platform to innovate, to create an innovative solution to adapt to climate change. And that's maybe something a lot of people don't know, because we all kind of get hung up on the idea that it's a school, it's children, it's a poor community. The vision had always been to create something that had capacity to solve the challenges of urbanization, rapid growth, development in a poor community, or in areas with scarce resources, not necessarily poor, but areas with scarce resources, and issues of climate change. Its school was in use for 4 years, 2012, 2016, extensively, and different things happened from. It was used and abused, and and everything was allowed. It was an open platform for the community, and we really engaged. We watched it. We worked with people. We constantly made repairs, and we worked with the community. In a way, it was actually just tested to destruction. In 2016, it was damaged, and it had been handed over. The community didn't take care of it, it came down. It wasn't really. It was under a very controlled environment, we were already working on a second version, which was absolutely fine. So it was in a way. We saw how you could develop a system, but also at points of failure, So, when it failed in 2016, we learned from that period and kind of understood where we needed to make improvements, and that's exactly what we did in 2000 for MFS2, which was the second prototype that we built in Venice, and we immediately. We had started building this in 2016, and we turned it into a prefabricated system, which allowed us to make it more modular, and we began engineering it in a much more robust way. Some of the challenges that we had in the first one were resolved in the second one. And in 2018, we again improved it even further and created MFS3, where it became a lot more modular, and it was designed to Eurocode with a lifespan of 30 years and the capacity to sort of assemble and reassemble it. So you can see the lines are a lot more regular. So, it became this building system that you could essentially flat pack. You can, with, very few components, you can assemble, put it together, or disassemble it. And in Venice, in Bruges, it was used as a school also, where students were kind of learning, as you see, how to kind of build their own floating towers and things like that. So in 2018, we then got another opportunity to build a fourth prototype, where we decided we needed to scale it and make it, a lot more. We just needed to scale it up and also scale it down. And if you want to increase production and capacity and, build faster, where do you go, Where do you go? China, right? China, exactly. So that's exactly where we went to China. And we actually found it was supported by the Centre Pompidou, and we were asked to build an exhibition for a larger exhibition project called Cosmopolis. And in Chengdu, we use the same frame, but we realized, okay, so the first frame, the first building is a 3-floor building. Now, when you think about it, building, even the first one that we did in Makoko, it's a 3-floor floating structure. Right? I mean, you'd be very hard pressed to find a 3-floor floating structure anywhere, like 3 above ground. But to have done that in a very poor community in Lagos with pretty much no heavy equipment, nothing more complex than a hand drill, with local materials, I think that in itself has been a feat. We then decided we should scale it down because the 3 floors had about 2,300 square foot space. But if you're going to do a house, you needed to have something smaller. So we decided to kind of scale it down to 2 floors using the same kind of frame. You could create this, you would have 2 floors and also 1 floor. So in itself, it embodied the same kind of modular system, and you can then kind of split from 2 to 3 to 1. Basically, it's the same thing that sort of splits into different things. So we created a community in Chengdu of a cluster of 3 buildings around a central plaza. So, starting to sort of demonstrate the capacity to use this system as a way of building different typologies of or building cities and communities in a way. So some of the important aspects of this is that, of course, it is prefab, it is modular, you can assemble it rapidly, it's scalable, it's self-built. We made sure in the process of developing the design that we kept the idea of how you can build it by hand and make it really simple, pretty much like, IKEA, and hopefully better than IKEA. I was talking to Milton that, this is hopefully something you can find in Home Depot, and you can order it and, assemble it by yourself. If you can do it by hand, you can also use a robot, so that's also fine. It's modular. It's just an A-frame. So this is the key thing, is that as an A-frame, I think I failed to mention why is it a triangle? A lot of people ask, a number of things. The triangle is a very rigid frame. It's a rigid structure. From a structural point of view, it has strength, it has stability and balance. From a flotation point of view, its center of gravity is relatively low, so it's actually really good for flotation. It's also a great shape because it allows you to build, it's self-built, so you can climb on it. So you never need scaffolding, right? If you have a house like that, once you go above, you need scaffolding. So that scaffolding also means more equipment, and equipment means a lot more cost. So it has a lot of embedded intelligence in the shape and the configuration, and it also allows you to be a lot more, you have shorter spans. So there are lots of things that we worked through over the years to create a structure that is also kind of, you can assemble, disassemble, it's mobile, you can move it forward. So what you actually see here is it's a bit of an illusion, because the small, medium, large, we have small, medium, and large, but the large is actually the small there, just kind of perspective and distance. This is, so in Chengdu, it was covered with plexiglass, and you can cover it with any kind of material. And the idea is that the structural frame can be adapted to local conditions, and all the elements that constitute the structural frame can also be fabricated locally. The components are so simple that you can make them in any workshop. And that's what I basically learned from Makoko, how to build simply and how to build affordably and how to build by hand. It was used for concerts, weddings. This is a view from top. And after the exhibition, we donated it to China, to the city, and we got a letter of appreciation as a model for development of waterfronts in China. So this sort of the idea that it's a local, it's something that is local, but it can be adapted globally. It's just evolution of the structure. We've done different typologies from M2. Oh, these are Amsterdam version. Having lots of fun, but it just shows that you can have different claddings and different fit outs or interior spaces. Some of the aspects of it: green, performance, water, light, recycles waste. You can basically, it's a very low tech structure, but the idea is that you can integrate all the relevant high technology. So you have water recycling systems, you have solar panels for power, you have, you can have a compost system for managing waste. So all these ideas that we always have for sustainable cities, why don't we start to look at them? Why don't we start to implement them in a structure like this? Because it allows you to be completely off grid. It allows you to build in areas that are normally undeveloped, like Makoko, which is what people actually do. That's why people live on water in most areas, because besides the fact that they are fishing and sawing community, they also are on a territory that is uncontested in a way, and land is currently, water is currently much cheaper than land in many parts of the world. The life cycle of MFS is quite straightforward. It's locally sourced wood. We usually would expect that from sustainable forestry. It's then sort of it's processed, and you use it to create the structure. You can maintain it. You can then disassemble it after several years of use, and then that can be recycled again. So we've been working on this. This has been 8 years and in the making. And last May, the UN Habitats invited us to speak at the first UN Habitat Assembly in Nairobi, which began sort of drawing a lot of attention internationally. We were asked to build, to exhibit a model in the UN Habitat Pond, and we're now starting to get a lot of interest from different regions. We're working on a project at a very early stage in Vietnam now. China is there. We've built it now in 4 countries and pretty much 3 continents. And we think this is something. This is just one of so many ideas, solutions that you probably are working on that we can use in sort of adapting to the challenges of climate change and urbanization in different regions. It's taken us this long, and I think there's a lot more effort that can be put into it. And what I'm mostly interested in is to inspire you, to inspire everyone else, and to get people to find their own solutions and bring other ideas that will contribute to a larger solution for cities. And then we kind of imagine that what if our cities of the future are not only tall buildings, high-rise as you have in Chicago, in New York, but start to integrate water into the fabric of the city. And as you sort of start getting even further out of the city, you have whether they're houses on stilts, on structures, or on slightly reclaimed land, but there's always this relationship with water that allows the fabric of the city to be a lot more adaptable to the changing conditions that you have. Areas where for play, areas for recreation, vegetation. You have areas to integrate plastic, and create a vision for what we call water cities. So this was an exhibition this is an image that we created actually for MoMA in 2014-15. And so where are we now? We're actually at a point where the Makoko floating system, we're now actually turning it into a separate entity where we really need to scale it up to find a way to meet the demand and to have people to have access to it. We're getting investors, innovation funds to start a building industry, or to work with current manufacturers and suppliers, but basically to create an access for people to develop their own, or for people to have a solution, to have this material for building their own communities. And like Milton mentioned, we will try to demonstrate that process in LA, which is kind of you'd probably be wondering what has Water City got to do with LA. But I think the idea of prefabrication and rapid assembly is very relevant, and maybe it's not floating, maybe it's on land. But the idea, a solution for creating very simple ways of building your own home or shelter or space for public cultural space is always very relevant. So we're very happy and grateful to the USC and MAD Workshop for providing this opportunity, and hopefully some of you will be able to join us next year to reassemble MFS3. So MFS3, which was in Bruges, has been disassembled, and we're going to reassemble it again for the first time. So actually this is also kind of a learning process first for us to reassemble the structure after it's been disassembled, which is the interesting thing about it. And after LA, the structure is going to move to Plymouth in the UK, and and we're also developing others in different parts of the world. So that brings me to the end. I'm just going to leave you with a 1-minute video that sort of captures the entire efforts on MFS so far. Thank you. Thank you. Questions?
Any questions? I got a question. We see a picture of the space inside. The geospatial quality inside the building.
Beg your pardon?
We see a picture of what the spatial condition inside. I'm just wondering if there's framing every couple of feet or.
Yeah, I think I may have shown several. Well, this is one, for instance. Right? Let's see. You might be able to see some of that. Sometimes the space. Oh, sorry. I was talking to myself here. Okay. Okay. So sometimes it's voided on the inside. So you can have a large open hall, like you have here. In this instance, it's a 2-floor building. It's got a floor on the inside. Framing. Let's see. There's also that, right?
So the sprinklers, because it's popular, then it's a sprinklers on the inside as well. Like every
2.5 meters. So it's it's 2.5 meter module. Yeah.
very, very cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your lecture. I'm very interested. I was just wondering, you come from a country where they use nature and leave it as it is, like the floating on water and do research on there. And I come from the Netherlands, and that's where we keep the water out, like basically the opposite of what your comedian kind of talks about.
Yeah.
Were you already interested in the floating, using water to build on, or was it something that you realized when you went all over the world and landed in Amsterdam and were like, why are people using this as?
Yeah. Well, so I'm sure you know I also come from the Netherlands, right? Partly from the Netherlands, and indeed, the position of the Netherlands historically has been to sort of keep the water out, but that's not completely true. The Netherlands is one of the cities with the most highest watersheds, right? It's pretty much underwater, right? It's below sea level. So it's just controlled. The water levels are controlled, but they have to allow water into the fabric of the city. Amsterdam has one of the largest waterways all around. So, and even now, more so, the Netherlands is more looking into how to integrate water much more as opposed to fighting it. So there's a different approach that is now being discussed. But to answer, I was definitely inspired by the Netherlands, but also inspired by a place like Lagos. But I think the real turning point was that moment, which was almost like an epiphany, when I was actually trying to I was trying to build, and I realized that that's because of climate change, that what we consider land is already water, right? It's going to be water. Like, we're going to have a lot more water real estate. We're going to be selling plots of water in the future, not plots of land. So why don't we create environments that we're not fighting with water, but learning to live with it?
A lot of the development, especially in the island, is really good.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
How has the environment kind of turned from that from like everyday life? That's just so much of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, we're a small firm trying to make big changes, and it's going to take time. We're trying to change culture. We're trying to change perception. Where we've been on this for a few years. We're now getting some backing, or the backing. There's now, let's say, a much larger, broader perspective from organizations like the UN that are starting to talk about floating cities as an alternative to development, which is counterculture to land reclamation that you see a lot in Lagos and many other parts of the world. So this is something that will take time, right? But we have to be ahead of curve. And what I've been showing all evening is really just one tiny, tiny drop in what is a huge body of work that we all have to be a part of. We haven't really solved the way we deal with so many aspects of it, the infrastructure, the water, the sanitation. There's so many things, but which sort of takes me back to the point of George Carlin, where we can't keep thinking, we should take an approach to saving the world. No, we need to just realize that these are challenges that we need to learn to live with, and we cannot. Our ways of thinking has to change to adapt to these new conditions.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I love the work, and it's close to so many things I've been thinking of: conventional lumber, structures, floating architecture, sailing architecture, floating cities, modular construction. I would. Some of our students have done some work in regard to Los Angeles, studying some opportunities for floating architecture, and I would love the opportunity to share some of their work in advance of your teaching. I think it would be very exciting to augment that. Like you said, so many of us need to contribute to this problem.
Great, thank you. I look forward to it.
Hi, thank you very much for the lecture. I was curious how of managing the sanitation and garbage disposal in a city like an African city with a growing poor population, and because they're going to be there for a long time, and they're not going to move.
Yes, yeah, it's a very good question. I always get the question of sanitation in the project, and I think the fact is that every city, it doesn't matter where you're on land, you're on water, you're in Africa, you're in Asia, or in Europe, sanitation, the problem is the same, right? We need to learn to manage our waste, right? Until we can create a new paradigm called Earth plus plastic, I think there are solutions, there are initiatives out there that are already dealing with this. So whether it's very simple approaches of recycling or sorting out your waste, managing it, creating or using less, single-use plastics and things like that. I think that there are approaches for dealing with waste and sanitation, and there are, different technological solutions for even managing organic waste, from biogas to composting systems. So we just need to find these things. They're experts. We're not. I mean, I'm not. I don't have the capacity, and probably most of us in architecture school, to design solutions for waste management. But if you're really good at it, then really go for it.
Thank you once again. You spoke about the current time span, about 25 years for these projects. Do you see that as something that's advantageous for your laws of ever-changing environments, or is your goal to make them more sustainable to the lifespan?
It's a very good question. And it's a question that also goes back to the issue of sustainability and temporariness versus permanence. We've engineered it now; it's 30 years lifespan, right? But I think there's a shifting perspective into the notion of what cities are today, and there's a sense of the idea of permanence, I think, is also changing. And we're starting to see a lot that people are looking for spaces that are more flexible. So an area can be occupied for a certain purpose for a particular, like 10, 15 years, and then it gets changed, right? So it's, urbanization, the trends in urbanization is also changing to be a lot more flexible. And I think creating structures that have a certain level of temporariness as opposed to permanence is also something that is valuable in architecture today.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, the water levels are rising.
Yeah.
So our habitat is getting smaller, but the aquatic colony is getting bigger.
Right.
So when we build floating cities or floating architecture,
right.
As a unit, as a bigger unit,
right.
So how does it affect the aquatic ecology? Like when we are burning it into their ecosystem, so how does it affect that? Like considering there are a lot of garbage disposal things and sanitation issues.
Yeah.
How does it affect their because we are talking about going deep into the waters with cities.
Right. There's, you have to do an environmental impact assessment for every project that you do, and there's an impact on the marine ecology, the water quality, and you can actually improve the quality of water, the marine quality, by introducing elements into the water. So it's not really it's not a one-on-one translation that once you build something in water, it becomes problematic, right? It depends on the material that is used. There are questions. Sometimes some organisms thrive in shaded areas. So even if you kind of have elements that are floating, so some aquatic life actually thrive better in those conditions. So it really depends. There are lots of factors that would influence the marine condition. We're building our first version of the floating system in an ocean in Cape Verde, and we've just done the environmental impact assessment, and it was positive. And we're also going to use it as a space to kind of learn to understand what the impact is on the marine life. So it's ongoing work. At this point, we're just trying to find a solution to stay afloat.
You touched on some of the storms that are coming with climate change. We're seeing more larger superstorms, hurricanes.
Right.
With your vision of floating cities in the future, do you see that the structure itself will become more resilient to these storms, or do you see supporting infrastructure like a breakwater or something? So, like how do you see that kind of resilience to the storm?
Yeah, so it's another good question. Okay, so the storms, when you have hurricanes, when you have tsunamis and major kind of major forces like that, it's very hard. It's very, very hard to create any kind of structure that would survive that environment, right? Especially those that are really facing the eye of the storm, so to speak. But what we understand is that there's a combination of solutions that you have to think about in addressing this environmental condition. Some of it is that you need to retreat, right? Maybe there's some defense mechanism. Some of it is about creating more porosity at those edges where these conditions happen. But whatever the case is, the overall general consensus is that there is an increase in the area of water. And that means that you may have to create even more lakes or more watersheds or more basins. And we're seeing that in China. China, they are developing areas where they're having more water bodies just to allow more fabric water into the environment and retreat, but allow more space for it. So I don't know. I mean, we've designed the structure now. It's engineered to 58 knots. I mean, that's quite high wind speed. I don't even think LA ever gets 58 knots. 58 knots, 63 knots is where hurricane speed starts. So in a way, it is quite resilient. It's very strong. The first one in Lagos was in storms of 32 knots, and it survived. That wasn't an issue, right? And in fact, when it was reportedly that the storm brought it down, it wasn't because of the storm. It was because it was damaged, and we had set it aside, and it was less than, I think, about 16 or 17 knots of wind. So we're cognizant of that. We're engineering it to have a lot more resilience, but I think the general solution is really about creating space for water in our urban fabrics.
Last question.
Thank you. I was struck by your use of terminology, in particular the terms water slippers. And I was wondering if, in addition to you conceptualizing and building and projecting, if you had any MA yourself, had any plans to come up with like a theory of a water scheme.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we are. So, like I said, this is just really one of several typologies of building infrastructure that we think need to be part of this, coexistence of people and the environment. So we're really interested in that transition between cities, water, so this is a floating structure. I'm not proposing that the entire world is going to be on floating structures. And certainly not on triangular floating structures. This is just one that we have invested our time in. We're working on stilt versions. We're working on we're working on amphibious buildings. We've done something called Chikoko Radio, which is something that sort of straddles water and land. The water scraper is an idea that, like the image that I had shown earlier on with in Miami, I'm kind of thinking, why why are we not really thinking about our towers as buildings that actually live in water? So, yeah, we're indeed developing typologies of towers that actually live in water. So that's where the idea of a water scraper emerged from.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.